Mike, welcome to the show, man. I was looking forward to this for a couple weeks.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely, man. So we got some mutual friends. I know we've connected before on a couple Zoom calls, and I've known about you. I've listened to your podcast. I figured you'd be a great guest for our show. So before we get into your business and we talk about what you've built out there in Eastern Washington, how did you get in real estate, man? You're a young guy like me.
Yeah, with real estate, it's funny because I feel like a lot of people get into it for two main reasons, right? Either you come from like a real estate family or you are kind of a burnout and everything else and you fall into real estate because that's what everyone who doesn't know what they want to do ends up doing, right?
Exactly.
And so I was the second one. Growing up, I grew up with like a very sort of traditional mindset in my family of you go to college, just like everyone else that was born in the 90s, right? You get your degree and that's going to set you up. And so that's what I did. So I got a electrical engineering degree and got a job right out of college when I graduated in 2013 because it was very easy to get engineering jobs back then.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then I trudged through a handful of different jobs. I was at Boeing for a number of years and I just hated the corporate lifestyle and being an engineer. So after 5 years of being a professional engineer, I decided to quit and walk away and do something different. I didn't really know what that was going to be yet, but I just knew it wasn't going to be engineering. So I was happy kind of taking the risk. And so in January 2018, I quit my job and started working at a gym just as like a part-time sort of thing to make ends meet. And I would drive for Uber in the evenings and I would listen to podcasts around business and building wealth and everything else. And real estate was kind of the recurring theme. That's what ultimately led me into dabbling in real estate about 6 months after I left.
That's awesome. Were you living in Seattle when you did this, or did you move back to your hometown?
Yeah. So when I graduated from school, so I went to Gonzaga University here in Spokane. I moved out to Seattle after I graduated. I lived down in Tacoma area. So not Seattle. People get territorial about the differences out there. So I lived down closer to Tacoma. And first job I had was a consulting sort of gig. And then I worked at Boeing for 2 years. And then after that, I didn't really like the traffic and everything, and the weather out in Seattle is pretty brutal.
Terrible.
So I moved back to Spokane for my last engineering job, which is
Okay.
ultimately where I was when I decided to quit.
Okay, so when you took the plunge, you were out of Seattle, you were back in the East where it's a little more sunnier.
We actually have proper seasons and not just like wet and dry like you have
Yeah.
out in Seattle. But that whole process did help a lot because I went from having for the 3.5 years I was out in Seattle, I was making Seattle salary. And, I lived in my apartment. I kept things pretty basic and I was really big into like the fire movement. Like I recognized early that I hated that lifestyle. And I remember meeting my boss who was like close to retirement age. And I was like, I do not want to be this guy when I'm in my 60s.
Yeah.
And so I started FIRE with the sort of mentality of investing super heavily and living lean and doing that with the Seattle salary. And then moving back to Spokane, and me and my wife moved back. We're living like kings over here because we've banked all this money and Spokane was so much cheaper. And so it did give us a little bit of runway when I decided to leave the corporate world.
That's a huge hack there, because if you live in, like, a Seattle, San Diego, New York, and then you move, like, 4 hours out of there, you're so right. What was it about the corporate life that sucked?
Yeah. So one of the challenges I personally had is I am, as my wife says, I'm like a hacker, right? So I'm always
Yeah.
trying to make stuff like efficient. And so I would constantly run into these issues where I would be driving for efficiency, which would be against kind of what you're supposed to do when you work in a traditional corporate environment.
Mm.
So as like an example, at the first job I had at the consulting company, I recognized very quickly that a lot of the jobs I would work on, you had to do the same calculations over and over and over again. And what you were supposed to do is they had like these worksheets and stuff that you're supposed to go through. You look at the National Electric Code, you figure out the sizing of like all the equipment, things like that. I was like, well, this is boring. So what I did is I built like this big spreadsheet. I spent like 2 weeks doing this where I could essentially just enter like a couple values and it would give me all the answers. And so I didn't have to do the work anymore, which is fine if you're doing like R&D, things like that. When you're doing consulting, you're selling time. So they
Yeah.
are bidding me out to basically work for 30 days, right, at whatever rate. And now I'm able to do the work in like a day. Like I was super stoked on this and I was like, hey, like, look what I built. To my boss is like, oh, we can't do that. It's like, we need you to work the, 100 hours on this deal. And I'm like, that's dumb. Like, I don't like that, right? It
Yeah.
doesn't make any sense. And so what I would do, because I'm not a super employable person, is I would just use the spreadsheet and then I would just, screw around for the other 95
Because you already
hours.
got the result delivered, so, like, what's the
Yeah.
point? Whether you go through 1 door or 100 doors, you get to the same pot of gold. Who gives a shit?
Exactly, right, and that was always my mentality, and then it was the same thing when I was at Boeing, where Boeing is, the definition of bureaucracy, right? You have
Yeah.
meetings to prepare for the meetings to prepare for the meeting that's preparing for the meeting, right?
Yeah.
And so I would do kinda similar stuff, And the real challenge in Boeing is instead of penalizing for it, they would say like, good job, you crushed it. You got to wait for the next step. And then I would spend 6 months just sitting there waiting. And the worst thing about that gig is because it was union, I had to be on site. So I was literally spending weeks and months just sitting in this dark office in this massive facility, just miserable. And it was just not for me. Those were like the really challenging parts. But on a bigger level, what I really struggled with corporate world is like the lack of freedom of time.
Yeah.
And on the very last job I had, and I'd say this is kind of like the turning point for me when I decided that I needed to do something different. So I read The 4 Hour Work Week. That was the one that kind of like influenced me to explore this whole concept of having like mini retirements and what a virtual business
Yeah.
can look like. And it was like August of 2017, and my sister-in-law was visiting, and we wanted to go to this little amusement park that was here. And the way that basically my vacation time was panning out, if we went to the amusement park, it was like a Friday. We were going to try and go. She needed to go back home on Saturday. If we took half the day off to go to the roller coaster park, I wasn't going to have enough time to go home for Christmas in 4 months. And I was like, this is ridiculous. Like
Yeah.
the fact that you can't take 4 hours in like a random day when nothing's happening, and then it influences your entire holiday period that you want to spend with your family. I was like, I need to get away from this because it just doesn't make any sense at all. And so when I left, the financial piece was important, but honestly, I just wanted to not be tied down to a location like that anymore.
Dude, 100%. And the only thing that was holding you back from doing that was the job, which is how you were making your money. So then it's like, if you could take the money factor and remove it and earn money doing something else, i.e. the business you build, you get the best of both worlds. Then you make more money. It's like the only reason people are at their job for 80 hours a week is because they need income, which makes
Mhm.
sense. But then if you can just solve for the income and make money doing something else, it's like people don't understand that there's another way to do this. Like, especially with all the technology now, like you can make money without having a 9 to 5 job. And it's never been easier, quite
It's
frankly.
totally. And then once you kind of understand the basic skill set of that, the snowball can just grow so quickly, and you can carve pieces of it off and put it into different endeavors as well if you want to,
Exactly.
right?
That's a heck of a story because a lot of people that they're in your situation and they don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. And they're like, oh, well, I got to do this for another 10 years, whatever. And they don't have that belief in themselves that they can actually quit their job and replace their income within a reasonable amount of time. Because you got started in 2018. I mean, that wasn't
Mhm.
even 10 years ago. So you've built something great, which we're about to talk about. And it's like you can accomplish a lot in a relatively short period of time. That's what I tell people. You can technically become like a millionaire in 5 years if you really get your act together and do the right things. Because a lot of people they work for 20 years and maybe they'll hit that net worth goal, and it's like you could do that in 5 if you have the right vehicle you're in, like real estate.
Yeah, absolutely. And the benefits that I did have, to be clear with people, are I didn't have kids at the point. We did own a home, so we had a stable living situation. My wife had a job, she's making like 50 grand a year, but it was consistent. But I had saved up well over $100,000 as like a cushion. So I had a lot of runway, and I was able to go in full time to figure things out, which is really what I think the real hack is, because most people, I mean, I'm sure you see people like this all the time, like they're entrepreneurially curious, and they're like, I need to have this 10-hour a day W-2 by the
Yeah,
time I leave my house to when I get home. And I'm going to like dabble in entrepreneurship for like an hour and a half a day. You're never
yeah,
going to make
that's
it,
tough.
honestly, or it's going to take you a decade if you're lucky.
Yeah. Especially with a job, because you got, the working hours, unless you're like arbitraging time zones, like what are you gonna get out of work at 6 and like make calls from like 7 to 8? People aren't even answering. It's just so much harder. And then you got to work all the weekends. But it's possible. But like you said, if you can go in with 2 feet, that's gonna give you the huge advantage. So let's talk about how you did that. So obviously you quit your job, you got introduced to this, different style of making money, obviously real estate. What was your marketing plan to get momentum, because this business is really all about leads and offers?
Yeah, so that took me about 2 years to even realize that, right?
Yeah.
And so I was in real estate for 2 full years before I even recognized that as a problem.
Okay.
And so when I first decided I was gonna get into real estate, I was full on the bigger pockets train like so many people were back in 2018, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, "This is all about cash flow." Like, that's the whole thing, is you
Oh, yeah.
buy
Rental cash
assets.
flow?
Yeah, you get cash flow, you get legacy wealth, like, that's what it is. But I was like, "But I don't know anything about houses, so I gotta keep it safe."
Yeah.
And so what I did to start is I had this old Boeing 401k that I liquidated because I didn't want to get into my security fund that I had in cash. And so I liquidated his corporate 401k, and I bought these two new build single family homes that were like right around the corner from where I lived. And I was like, sweet, the monthly payment on them is going to be like $1,100. I'm going to be able to rent them for 1,600. So I'm gonna make $1,000 a month right there. Like I'm
Yeah.
cooking, you know. Of course, it's not how it works when you account
Yeah.
for vacancy and property management and everything else.
Yeah.
But I did get into these houses and it kind of got, I would say like it got the jitters off my back of actually buying a home like this, right? And so
Yeah.
I bought these two houses. It completely wiped out my spendable liquidity, right? I didn't have any earning power. And
Yeah.
at that point, I had started reading books around like actually learning how to make money. And I said, I like this real estate thing. How can I create a higher income doing this? And that's how I got into flipping houses. So I started flipping houses at the end of 2018.
Like fix and flipping houses or
Like
like,
fixing flipping
okay.
houses, not wholetailing. I didn't even know what that was yet at this point,
Okay.
right? I was buying REOs that had been condemned for 2, 3 years.
Oh, wow.
Like literally the very first house that I bought was an REO from an agent. I didn't have money to do this. So how I structured it was I met this couple at a meetup that owned a plumbing company. And they were like just sitting on cash, right? And they're like, we're so busy with this company, but we want to get into real estate. I didn't have money. I had nothing but time. And so we decided that we would work together and just split deals 50-50. And then they could bring labor to do some of like the plumbing and more technical stuff.
Yeah.
So it worked out pretty well. But this first house that we bought, it had been condemned for like 3 years. And we literally, we went and made the offer on it. We're happy with it. We went and turned on the water and all the pipes had burst over the years from like freezing. And literally, I will always remember the water cascading down the stairs from upstairs in this house because everything exploded. We had to completely repipe the entire house. I didn't even know that was something that could happen. But like those are the kind of houses that I started with. So I learned
Yeah.
a lot of the hard lessons around renovations pretty quickly.
That's honestly a blessing because like a lot of people, they don't do that. And then they get into rehabs and they think they know what they're doing because they might know how to get deals, but then they don't understand construction budgets and like scopes of work. And then they get smoked on rehab. So like, I feel like you learned one of the harder parts of the business pretty quickly.
I did, yeah.
Direct to seller marketing and like managing a rehab couldn't be more different.
Totally. And I think also too, on like kind of a more macro level, I learned to deal with hard situations right out
Yeah.
of the gate. And I didn't understand that that wasn't what everyone does, you
Yeah.
know, because that first house that we bought, it took us 4 months to go through this whole thing. And I was out there a ton, you know, just like managing contractors. Some of the stuff my wife and I did on our own, like installing LVP, we hung drywall, you know, we did like the painting, all that sort of stuff. And I had never even used a power tool before in my whole life. And it was my wife and I with like these boxes of flooring and we're like watching videos about like how to install LVP. And we're like, just, okay, so I guess this is how we do it. How do I use this saw? I've never even done this.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, we just figured it out. And it took 4 months to do this. And at the end of it, with all the hiccups that we had, I made a net $4,000. So
After it was all said and done.
after it was all said and done, I made $1,000 a month. And if I were to take into account the gas that I spent driving back and forth between this house, I probably lost money, to be
Yeah.
fair.
But you got the skills under your
I got the
belt.
skills.
You got the
Totally. And
experience.
I wasn't afraid of anything at that point, right? And then we bought the second one before we sold the first one. So I knew I had to do it again. And that one we ended up making about $40,000.
That was another REO
That was another REO.
from the
Yeah,
MLS. That used to be pretty big, like before
did.
like 2020. I never got involved with them, but like I would see them on there, and if they were sitting for a while, you know, people were scooping them up.
Yeah, so they still do here in Washington. It's not quite as bad though. And there's always variables about like why they're in foreclosure and different things. But yeah, the first three we did were REOs. And then after that, I started buying from wholesalers.
I've done pretty well buying from wholesalers, but the only thing I'll say like with doing that I don't like is if it's like a wholesaler I've never worked with before, the thing that gets me nervous about that is I just don't know their agreements with the seller. Like obviously I need to see their contract before I sign an assignment. I don't care what their price is. You know what I mean? It's such a Wild West kind of thing. How did you deal with that in the beginning?
Well, just ignorance, honestly.
Yeah,
I mean, after
been there.
doing my first couple of flips, I thought I was the bee's knees, dude. I knew how to do this game. I was a pro, you know? And so I started buying from wholesalers with kind of blind confidence. The first one I bought, they made like a $10,000 fee. It was a relatively simple deal. It wasn't that much more than a wholesale, right? It was a basic
Yeah.
cleanup, put it on the market. It sold relatively quickly. The next one I bought turned into a pretty large project, right? And there was a lot of things, there was a lot of like red flags that showed up that I remember talking to the wholesaler about, but he just was totally like, oh yeah, it's no problem. You know, yeah, the tenant will be out. It's easy. Like the lease is good. Like all this bullshit, you know? And then like before we closed it, we got a hard money lender for that one. It was a higher price point. And they like flagged the house because they're like, there's all these electrical problems that the loose inspector, like the 4-point inspector that came out for the hard money lender saw. And I was like, it's fine. I'll just buy it anyway. And then that lender backed out. And so I worked with the lender that the wholesaler recommended, who was like his buddy, you know? So like there was so many dumb things that I did, but I assumed I was a pro. And on that deal, they made $40,000 on the assignment fee.
Okay.
And so at this point, if you go fast forward, I actually lost $25,000 on that house because of a myriad of different things. That was my first loss. But that $40,000 on the HUD statement, when you see stuff like that, there's always things that people, you can say like, I don't care, deal works for me, that's great, which I thought that time was fine. You can go like, I don't really like the wholesalers that make that much money. I don't really want to work with wholesalers again. I don't like this guy, whatever. Or you can do the third option, which goes, how can I be the guy that makes that 40 grand?
Yeah, exactly. How do
Right.
I sell the shovel? Yep.
Exactly. And so that's what I decided I was going to do. And sort of that's what led me down to the direct to seller marketing and sales game, which has become my full-time business.
Yeah, and that's when you're in full control of your income, in my opinion. I always say it's like if you can control that inventory, whether you're flipping it, renting it, assigning it, that's where you get the consistency, and that's how you've grown your business. So before we get into your marketing and what you've found to be successful over the last 5 years, what does your business look like today so we could just tell people what is possible? Because you built a great thing out there in Spokane.
Yeah. So we officially launched at the very end of 2019. It was like December 2019, right before
Damn.
COVID. So it's made things interesting.
Yeah,
We just closed our 500th deal since we
that's
started.
amazing.
So
Holy
that's,
shit.
what, 5 years. So pretty stoked with that. And what the business has looked like, it's changed a lot over the years. So when it first started, it was me and my business partner hustling. And then we had one acquisition manager and one TC. And we ran it like that for about 2.5 years. That was in 2022. The market started to get real kind of iffy here in Spokane. Things had increased in value an insane amount. And we decided that we were going to try and look somewhere else. So we started a virtual company, which at its peak, we had a staff of 23 people and we were in 15 markets. And so we ran that from basically middle of 2022, actually until about November of 2014. So a couple of months ago. And so we had that big team running that. And kind of the model there was just low hanging fruit in all these markets. So we would take our same marketing budget, instead of like dialing in on one market, we would send out like $5,000 to $8,000 in all these different markets. And we would just look for like the person's like, please buy my house right
Take
now.
my house from me. Like, where were
Mhm.
you like focusing on geographically speaking?
So a lot in the Southeast and the Midwest, as you'd
Okay.
expect.
Cheaper price points.
So yeah, cheaper price points. Average price points were typically under 200,000 on the
Oh,
exit.
wow.
So we were getting contracts for, it was like you get the contract for 80, you sell it for
Oh,
90 kind of thing,
gosh.
right? But yeah, they're all kind of dispersed. And our strategy for finding places is we would always go places where there was someone that lived there that we already knew. So we would have an initial boots on the ground that could help out with a lot of the BS. And then we also wanted them to be not in like a primary market. So instead of going to Charlotte, we would go to some of the tertiary towns around the outside that are like 45 minutes to an hour away. And we did that in all the different places that we dropped into, because those would be the areas that like a legit flipper was okay to flip in, but it
Yep.
wasn't where everyone that heard about Charlotte on a Bigger Pockets episode was going to be launching marketing.
Yeah, it
Right.
wasn't highly saturated like a Seattle or a San Diego or Charlotte.
Exactly.
Were you doing like pay per click there?
So 94% of our deals last year came from direct mail.
You were mailing in those areas.
We were, yes. We did
Okay.
156 transactions in 2014, and 94% of them came from direct mail. And basically, we would pull the niche list, just the most basic stuff, right? We pull it off Prop Stream and Deal Machine, stack the list, and then we would mail $5,000 to $8,000 per
Oh,
market.
wow. Okay.
And then we would do that. We ran a cold calling and SMS team through 2023. When all the regulations started getting weird,
Yeah,
we
you
wound
covered
that
it.
down because
Yeah.
I didn't want to get popped. And then for the only online stuff we would do is we would do a lot of retargeting. So,
Okay.
when people visited our website from our mailers, they would start seeing us everywhere. But our total, like across everything, our online marketing budget was only like $2,000 because it was literally just the retargeting stuff. There was no
Got it.
cool PPC.
Okay. So you were mailing. That's interesting because you're like strategically doing the mail. Because if you're mailing in the suburbs of Charlotte, not the city, you're going to get a way better response rate. And that's pretty cool. Because a
Yeah.
lot of guys just do the Google ads. And that's what we see. We compete a lot of times where some Texas wholesaler calls the seller in New York or Seattle, wherever, and they're making some bullshit offer. But you guys are really more intentional with what you were doing with the mail. You had a lot more skin in the game.
Yeah, and it's all targeted too, right? Like that's the thing that I struggle with PPC stuff is sure people are motivated when they talk to you, but it's hard to know when that's going to happen. It's also hard to know their situation versus on a direct mail lead. When we send out direct mail, even if somebody comes in and they play hard to get, right? You know that there's something in their history that is causing them to reach out
Exactly.
because you know that we can look it up. They're on the bankruptcy list. They're acting like all's cool, but I know it's not. Like I've already verified that. That's why we contacted them
Dude.
in the first place.
That's why I've been telling people for like almost 10 years now, direct mail is the best marketing channel. People are always like, dude, the response rates suck. I'm like, bro, I don't care if the response rates suck. The returns is amazing. Like I've always found mail works. Like we use open letter marketing. They're a great
Mhm.
mail house. We don't send any crazy postcards that would blow you away. We use the
Nope.
templated ones and, we can track it and control it. And like you said, they're calling in absentee owner, whatever the case is, whatever list they're on. So there is that inherent motivation there, which people, they get frustrated with mail. I'm like, you just got to do it for a while and it will
I
become really profitable.
I think that's the key, right? Is most people aren't patient enough. We tracked this every time we would launch a new market, and we would find that it would take about month 4 for our cost per
Yes.
lead to level out at the average, which is typically between 150 to $250 per
Yep.
lead, right? And most people, they will send like month 1, and they're like, I didn't get a deal, so this sucks. But we mailed the same list indefinitely too,
Yeah.
and we're not doing all this like predictive list AI bullshit. And every time I talk to people on Instagram or like, people that are like newer or even if they're established trying to figure out mail, they always want me to have like some hack. And
Yeah.
what we do is like go do the most basic YouTube list pulling you can find. And
Yeah.
we've used open letter, we've used ballpoint, we do like some branded postcards, use some offer postcards, we do letters in white envelopes, and we have a little 3-month sequence that we just send over and over and over again to the same people.
Yeah.
And it's been working now for 5 years. And the great thing is about direct mail too is the actual labor that it takes to do the marketing is exactly the same if you're doing 5,000 pieces or you're doing 500,000 pieces. It's just a larger
Exactly.
list. And
Completely
so it
scalable.
makes it so easy to scale on the front end. The back end, when you're closing the deals, takes time, but that's the business part and that's where you make money.
Dude, that's interesting you're saying that. I was talking to my buddy the other day because I bought every piece of expensive data you could think of, all the
Yeah.
companies that I'm sure people know about if they're in the
Mhm.
business. I haven't seen a clear-cut improvement in results, and I've seen a clear-cut improvement in the cost because the data is 10 times more expensive.
Yeah.
Have you ever played around with any of those companies?
We have, and we found the same thing, right?
Same
Like,
shit.
is the same shit. So we really track our front end KPIs, like the, cost per lead, number of contacts that we need to close a deal, things like that.
Yeah.
And then to get to our average cost per deal, which when we were running our national company was close to 4,200, 4,400 bucks. But in those markets, it's not great. So our ROAS in those markets would typically be about 3.5 to 4x versus in Spokane, we're typically about 7x, which is
That's
a
right.
lot better. But what we would find is like all those numbers would start to creep up during the more expensive data, right?
Yeah, that's what
And
happened to me, dude. My break even was crazy. Just
yeah.
had this happen on a company actually in Washington. Spent
Mhm.
like 13K, just closed the deal. And I was like, all right, well, I got my money back at least. But like, I just spent fucking almost 15 G's on this thing. If I pulled that list off PropStream, it's funny you say that because I did another test. Expensive data company in Reno, where I used to live. That freaking same owner on the expensive list was on the random plain Jane absentee owner list. And I'm like, are you
Yeah.
fucking
Yeah.
kidding
Isn't that funny? I know. And the funny thing is too, as I always feel like people that question that, they're like, oh yeah, I pulled that list on Procter and you recommended, and I don't think it's very accurate based off what I checked. I was like, well, did you check all 7,000 records that you looked at? Like, no, I checked 4. I was like, well, maybe check like 200 more or 300 more. And then if all those are wrong, then you have a problem. Right. But if you just take a random sample of 7,000 records, yeah, there are going to be some that are wrong. But that's kind of part of the game,
that's data.
honestly. It is data. Yeah, it is mass data, and you're relying on what the county's putting out there and maintaining. We all know how the government works. We know it's not going to be that accurate, but it's a numbers game, right? That's why you have to just sort of buy into that.
I went on P Radar the other day because on the West Coast, like P Radar is just sick. What I would do is I would take the tax delinquent property radar data and then
Mhm.
I would go into like, King County, wherever, and I would see if it was tax delinquent. And a lot of it was. So it's like, you never know. Like they're all similar in pricing, deal machines. I'm starting to become more of a cheaper data guy, like
Mhm.
using the service providers. And I feel like that's going to boost our return because I'm tired of paying, 15, 20,000 a year for data. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, kind of my theory with data too, and same with like skip tracing. I mean, you were around in like the 21, 22 when
Oh,
skip
yeah.
tracing was like the oil
Oh,
boom of real estate, bro.
oh,
Everyone
yeah.
was starting a skip tracing
Household
company.
term.
They were all like selling each other's data. And I think
Yeah.
at this point, it was the same with the skip tracing the data. Like everyone's has the same stuff now. They all bought it from each other. They all ripped
Exactly.
each other off. They all like stole it from everybody
Yep.
else. So there's nothing that can really happen that's going to be that much better than the other person at this point.
Exactly, and all these guys get it from the same, like, 2 vendors. It's all the
And
same. It's
they're
Black
all like,
Knight, CoreLogic, same
yeah,
shit.
exactly. And they're always like, well, this is where mine's from. I get my numbers from IDI. I'm like, so does
Yeah.
everybody else.
The other thing I will do with data, I go down a rabbit hole about this. I was buying niche data from a company, and the data they gave was pretty good, but it was very expensive,
Mhm.
insanely expensive niche data. Probate, pre-probate, tax delinquent, right? You could get that from the county, obviously, which is how they got it.
Mhm.
So now what I did was I said, all right, I pulled the county files like in Pierce and stuff. It's super easy. Like Washington's like great with data. New
Mhm.
York is the opposite. But now I'm scrapping that data from the raw county. We're going to clean it up and mail it, which we've always done, but I stopped doing it because I was buying it from that expensive vendor. So like in my head, I'm like, okay, you can get the data for free from the county, and then you could just use the tools to pull whatever else you want. I'd rather send more units of mail out and increase my odds versus like buy the data or sharpen the axe, as they would say.
And it just gives you less opportunities, like, if you look at it.
Exactly.
And this is I don't know if this exists in all businesses because I've just been in real estate for so long, but I always feel like there's this intrinsic draw for real estate investors to wanna try and reduce, like, the smallest costs for some reason,
Yeah.
right? And they're like, "I'm
Right.
trying to get my cost per deal down." I'm like, "Well, if you're currently at $3,500, just for our example, you're gonna get it down to $3,000? Like, you're gonna save $500 per deal." Is like, what if instead you increase the other end of it and you made more per deal? You have a lot more room to go up than you go down because you're not going to get the
Exactly.
cost per deal to zero,
No,
right?
exactly.
Like,
Exactly.
there's going to be a point where you have to be spending money to do it, but you can
Exactly.
increase the other end indefinitely. So you're focusing on the wrong piece.
100%. I say that to people a lot. I'm like, I know guys who just wholesale everything. They won't even consider buying something. And like, I have a little small coaching group, nothing crazy. And this guy came in the other day, one of our clients, and he was like telling me these numbers. And I was telling him before like the end of last year, I'm like, all right, like next year, I don't want you wholesaling everything. I want you to take some deals down. I'll teach you how to get hard money, whatever. And he told me these numbers. And I was like, all right, so you're telling me you're going to sign this for 30? And I said, based on what you told me in these pictures and like my limited knowledge of this market, you can make 60 if you just close on this thing and pop it on the MLS wholesale. And now you're going to make double the profit. Your cost per deal is going to be the exact same. And you're going to make an extra 30 grand if you wait basically 30 days. That will change your business because then your net profit is ultimately going to go up. And that's like you said, people like, how do I get my cost down? It's like, no, how do I get my margins up? And
Mhm.
then my cost might rise a little bit, but my return will ultimately be better.
Yeah, and that's just business 101, right? But
Yeah.
I don't know why with real estate people, I feel like they tend to just really wanna try to get the other way around. It's like the people
Yeah.
that shop around or, like, go to, like, a more pain in the ass hard money lender to save, like, half a
Oh,
point, right? It's like after a while, dude, like, understand they're gonna make their money off of the doc fees and other stuff that they're not telling
yes.
you about right now anyway. Like, why are you making it such an issue?
Yeah, it's crazy, man. So you've done the model where you were in multiple markets. Now you're back mostly in the Eastern Washington area. So like
Yep.
how do you and your partner make decisions on what properties you're going to assign out versus, take down?
Yeah. So when we first started, rates and everything were low. So we pretty much either wholesaled or we kept it. So I
Okay.
built a decent little portfolio through 2019. I started keeping properties 2019 through mid 2022. At the end of it, I had about 52 units, like 30 something properties. I was
Yeah.
pretty stoked on that. And then I've slowly been selling off properties where the return on equity was real low. But in that period of time, we would flip stuff that like either had huge profit potential or was in neighborhoods where I didn't really want to keep. And so over that period of time, we probably realistically only flipped like 20 houses. And then when we got into 2022 and 23, and we started doing these more virtual markets, we started encountering true wholesales that you could see a little bit more clearly,
Yeah.
mostly because the houses were so much more affordable than what we were seeing in Eastern Washington when we left.
Yeah.
Because the issue that we have in Eastern Washington, unlike Seattle, I'm sure Seattle real estate's expensive, but people that live there also make money,
Big
right?
money.
In Eastern Washington, we don't have that. The real estate's
Mm.
expensive. The average income here is still only like 48 grand, right?
Wow. That seems
Mhm.
very similar to Reno.
Yeah, so it
It's
causes a lot of issues
yeah.
because the only people that are really buying properties, they want like, higher tier or they want super cheap. And so there's
Yeah.
this funny middle ground, which is where we find a lot of our deals where it is hard to sell things on the MLS. But
Yeah.
when we went virtual, we kind of stopped doing that, right? And we're able to wholesale a little bit more. And so our typical process has always been that we don't want to do any major fixer uppers. Like on average, like 25 to 30 grand on a fix up is what we'll do,
Yeah.
kitchen, bathroom, whatever. Or if there's a value add play. So some of the best deals that we've done, if it's like a 2-1 house and we're able to make it a 4-2 by obviously finishing a basement, we'll do those because that's a very easy, clear, direct value add. Otherwise, we need to be making 3x on a flip versus a wholesale to
Okay.
go and take it down. And so, like the example you gave, where it was you could wholesale it for 30 or you flip for 60, I honestly would probably wholesale that. right?
Okay.
But it's because on my team, what we're good at is the marketing and acquisitions. So I
Yep.
have the opportunity cost of putting that $30,000 into marketing, which will net me more than the extra $30,000 that I am
Oh,
taking a
because
risk
yeah,
on if
because
it
your
doesn't
return on
close.
the ROAS is going to be higher if you keep that marketing engine running.
Exactly.
Got it.
Yeah. And so if I take into the realistic amount of time and effort to put that together, the risk that it might not sell, the 90 days it'll be on market or
Yeah.
close, if that does happen, for me to put that back in the marketing machine, I will probably make more money. So typically, like just to wrap that up, low reno costs, wholesale-ish, either that or a high value add potential, and it needs to be 3x what we can
Yes.
wholesale it for. Otherwise, we'll just
You
wholesale it.
mentioned the finished basement. That's the Seattle special right there.
Same as Spokane. Yeah.
That is
We've
the
done
Seattle special, dude.
our biggest Grand Slam deal that we did was in 2020. It was a duplex that was a 1-1 on each side, and it had a fully unfinished basement underneath it. The tenants were
Yeah.
just storing stuff in there. And so what we did is we cut stairwells into each of the units and basically made it 2 3-bed, 2-bath units. And so we bought this thing for 190. And then once it was all said and done, it appraised for 475.
Oh my God.
We kept that one. We still
Yeah.
own it. But yeah, we pulled out like there's like
Oh
$180,000
my
cash.
gosh.
Yeah.
That's a home run, man. Those are the best deals because you make your cash, you have no
Mhm.
tax on that cash. You
Yeah.
got your cash flow, you got your depreciation. That's the holy grail. That's why you do the business, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
How competitive is Spokane compared to like Seattle? It seems like it's a smaller market. It's probably pretty competitive because it's not
It
as many people.
it is, and I think that's one of the reasons that it is so competitive is because it's generally a small population, and one of the issues here is that, like, there's a lot of, like, old money, especially for the population size.
Yeah.
So there's, like, 5 families that own a lot of the bad properties, and they're not
Interesting.
really in the game anymore, but they will still just covet all these trashy houses like some sort of real estate hoarding dragon, right? Like,
Yeah.
they have, like, their little empire, and they won't sell them. And so one of the issues is like they legitimately have kind of a monopoly on the
Yeah.
market, right? And so the actual opportunity that exists is quite a bit lower than you find in other places that are a little bit larger or don't quite have that same dynamic. Might be because like Spokane was an industrial town. And so you had the people that came in and started that owned like the lumber that was out here and the manufacturing that was out there. And now their kids and grandkids still live here. And there's like several billionaire families that own large portions of Spokane. So it's really hard to get stuff done.
Spokane and Reno seem very similar, man, with what you're saying, because I lived there
Yeah.
and there was not a lot of houses like
Mhm,
to do deals with, but it was expensive. But the
mhm.
income there is not anything near like it is in even like a Las Vegas or like a Seattle.
No, not at
It's a
all. You know, and
beautiful.
and and the funny thing too about Spokane is that, like, even though the average income is pretty low, there are a lot of people that do pretty well. That's what makes, like, the middle tier real estate so tricky is because, like, the people that do well, they wanna live in the nicer spots, and then the
Yeah.
people that don't, they can't necessarily do it. But, like, the actual investor population in Spokane's pretty small. Like,
Yeah.
there's us, there's our main competitor that does wholesale, there's a home investors guy that does really well, there's a couple people that do a lot of flips. But besides that, there's like some onesie twosie people, but it's not like you go to a larger metro and there's 20 companies that are doing legitimate
Yeah,
deals.
it's not like San Diego's like even Seattle's like that. There's a billion people. Are you seeing when you're running up against other buyers, is it the same like 1 or 2 guys basically every time?
Always. Yeah, just like everywhere else too. It's funny because people will like hit you up and be like, "Hey, I really want, a deal. Can you add me to your list, whatever?" And then, we build out this buyers list. It's like 600 people. And then we send something out, and the same 3 guys are the ones that are like, "Hey, I'll take it." You don't even hear from anybody else. I'm like, why are you wasting my time even messaging me on Facebook saying you want to buy deals if you're not even going to make an offer or inquire?
Exactly. Now
Yep.
what I do, because I flip a lot more and wholesale, is like if I'm putting out a property for assignment, it's like first come, first serve. How do you guys do that in your market?
So pretty much with every deal, what we do, just for simplicity, is we have our list of like 5 general buyers, and we'll always
Yeah.
float it to all of them first. If none of them give us an offer that we want, because that's the other thing too, is we don't always have an asking price. We'll have our contract price, and we're confident in our numbers, and say, "Hey, give us your highest and best on this," and that way that we're not like making them bid each other up.
I've always put a number on mine. Maybe I start doing that differently.
Yeah, and you can even just say like, "Hey, we're trying to figure this out. Let me know what your highest and best would be. I'm sending it to a couple of people, and we're just going to try and make sure that we actually have the contract in the price range." We typically know that we do, so we have
Yeah.
leverage, but it makes them not sort of screw you around. We'll go do that. If we don't get a price that we like, then we will send it out to like a larger list, and we will tell people that we need a highest and best offer, and we always put a deadline on it. And
Got it.
then we make sure that we don't accept anything up before that deadline, so people do get a fair shot. And then we are
Got it.
very clear with what we follow up with everybody. We let them know what the offer was we accepted, just so they know for next time. And we'll let them know, like, we always encourage people to keep making offers and keep
That's awesome.
inquiring. That's something else that we always do too, is we tell people, no offer is too low, right? Even if you're
Yeah.
going to be below our asking price, always make an offer, because what that does is that encourages them to engage with your company. And so even if they lowball you on the first one, they missed out by a lot, and they're like, damn, somebody paid 10 grand over
I
asking
want the
price.
next fucking
I
deal.
want the next one. I want the
Yes.
next
I want to
one.
buy a deal from Mike. Dude, that's human psychology, man.
It is. I mean, and also too, something that's changed about this business, I think, over the last couple of years, is I feel like for so long people talked about the sales process being the acquisition side, which it definitely is. But as companies have gotten more sophisticated, I would actually say this true sales process now is on the buyer side, right? And the acquisitions is your like product procurement. You're getting your inventory where you're going to monetize, right? You know, it's where it's the shoe factory that has the shoes that you're going to sell to
Yes.
your customers. But the buyer's end is the true power, because
Yeah.
you can have the best deal, but if you don't have a good buyers list or a good list of buyers, you're not going to make any
Toast.
money off of it.
Even that guy who made 100 something thousand the other day for me, he could have sold that for 380. You know, I think I offered him 30K less than he wanted. But I mean, I'm like, I'm going to give you a number that I can do the deal at. Like, that's another thing. I had this other wholesaler. I love condos, even though in Washington, some of the HOAs are fucked up out here.
Mhm.
But this wholesale, I actually got the same deal from two wholesalers. Their numbers were accurate. Like, the ARV made sense. I agreed with their ARV. The rehab numbers made sense. But their price, I said to both of them, like, I get you guys want to sell it for that number. No one's going to give you that number. So I said, I'll be at 135. They wanted 175. I don't think they're going to take it, but like, I make an offer on every property if it's a
You
whole.
should.
Like, if you could do that number, maybe a little 5 grand more, I'll do it sight unseen. You don't got to worry about it. Cause if I tell a wholesaler I'm buying their house, I'm buying the fucking house. Cause I want them to come back to me and know me as a legit real buyer.
See, and that's awesome, right? And they can approach that two ways: is they can recognize you as a legit buyer that will be an easy option for them. They
Yep.
can get a learning lesson. They probably need to get a little bit better at their numbers, or they can be like, Greg's an asshole. We're not going to talk to him anymore. But the first two options will ones that will be more productive going into the future. And that's something that, like, having those secure buyers is such an important piece, especially when you're starting out, because even if it means you got to make less money, but if you have like a tricky deal to get done, you have
Yep.
someone that you can rely on. You have a weird situation that, you know, you're not going to be able to walk people through the house because the seller's a
Yep.
psycho, right? You
Exactly.
need to have that secure sight unseen buyer in your back pocket all the time, because even if you make less money, it's better than making no money.
I had the same thing happen where I needed to get a deal done. It was actually not far from where I live in West Seattle. And I had Heat and Daynard. They're a super reliable buyer. I hit them up. They were like, yep, we'll take it. It was a little bit lower than I wanted, but they got the deal done. And I'm like, it's a win-win. So anyway, I could talk about this all day, man. You've built a
Yeah.
great business. I guess as we start to wrap the show up, you mentioned your rental portfolio. You built it up, and then you said you've been selling some of them off when the return on equity isn't great. Can you explain to the listeners what that is? Because I remember hearing about that,
Yeah,
and I never thought about my properties that way, but it really is a good way to look at stuff.
totally. And there's this whole notion with real estate, and I think it's just from, I don't know, the old Bigger Pockets days, and that was the main real estate media I ever listened to, about like this passive cash flow
Yeah.
that is very romanticized and people get very tied to, right? As I built up a portfolio, and you know, we've now gone over like a little bell curve in the economy, I've come to learn that that's kind of like a myth if you take into account the actual like middle and long term things that happen with a property. So there's several properties that I bought. I was able to do like a full cash out refinance, have nice low interest rates. They're cash flowing like a beast in 21 and 22, right? Everything's awesome. And even though I had $100,000 in equity parked there, I was making $1,000, $1,500 a month in cash flow, especially on some of these duplexes. It's like, sweet, these are awesome. What's gone on over time? You know, the properties have dropped in value a little bit, which is bound to happen. But also, the property taxes have gone up from when I bought them several years ago, because they were doing the initial assessed value based on what I bought it for, which I did buy it for a discount. So I have like one triplex in particular. For 2 years in a row, the property taxes increased $500 a month and then $700 a month.
A month?
Right? A month. Yeah. So seriously, it's
Damn, dude.
crazy. But like, I bought this property for 300 grand. And I could now sell it for like 750. So like, I've gotten my value, but what happens is the rents don't keep up with that. So
No.
all of a sudden I have this property that, you know, I have $400,000 in equity in that I was cash flowing almost 3 grand. I'm now cash flowing $1,200. And so what happens if I look at the true opportunity cost of that equity that I have tied up there, it doesn't really make sense for me to have this property that, like, if there's a bathroom issue, it wipes out the cash flow for the whole year. When in reality, I could take that $300,000 in equity, I could put that into marketing, I could put that into a property flip, I could put that into my hard money lending company. I could do so many other things that will actually get me a return than just having this equity that's parked there. And sure, I get cash flow if things go well. But
Mhm.
also the tricky thing is that the longer you own properties, you're always sort of like marching towards the next maintenance issue. So like I have a couple mentors that own like hundreds and hundreds of properties they bought over the years. And the thing that I come to find from talking to them is on average, they will only hold properties for 3 to 7 years, right?
Mhm.
Like the A class, like fully renovated ones, they'll hold in a longer term. The ones that are kind of like C class, they're cash flowing, but they lipstick and load, they'll hold them for 3, because
Yeah.
that's like the lifespan of the actual renovation that you did on the house, right? And the actual
Yeah.
value add. And at that point, they'll reposition the cash either into more property or do something else. So that's what I've been doing.
Dude, that's such a good way to look at it because, like you said, every rental, you're one day away from the next capital
Yeah.
expenditure or maintenance call, whatever. Are you 1031ing these or are you just paying us the long-term cap gains and just rocking and rolling?
Yeah. So when I sold a little portfolio of 5 properties that I owned back in 23. And my intention was to do a 1031,
Yeah.
right? I was going to buy it was actually a short-term rental down in Austin. And I was all the way through the process. I was like a week out from closing. And I got to the final HUD statement and I went through the numbers, and with the higher interest rates, with the DSCR costs, with the 1031 costs, with everything else, the actual cost to buy the new property was only a $10,000 difference from just paying the taxes. Because I was trying to
Oh,
avoid like a
okay.
$50,000 tax burden. I was buying this Austin property, which was like 950 grand. And it was like 40 grand to buy this damn property with the DSCR lenders. And I was like, this is going to be a very mid-performing property at what I feel like is the height of the market in Austin, which I was right. And I'm only going to be saving realistically 10 grand. I would rather just take full unencumbered access to my cash. So I lost my earnest money, did all this nonsense, and just took the money. And so going forward, that's something that I've really been considering as I'm going through is like, is there actually a true net savings on my gain if I
Yeah.
take into account the transactional and financial costs
Closing
on the
costs, all the
purchase?
bullshit, excise tax, you name it.
Yeah, and that's something else that I got from one of my mentors, that same ones that own multiple hundred properties, right? Is they're like, you have to take into account the actual true cost to do the acquisition, not just the sale, which everyone always focuses on. And does it actually make sense 1031? And as they put it too, you can lose a hell of a lot more than your tax savings if you buy a bad deal. And sometimes
Well
it makes
said.
sense just to pay the taxes.
Dude, I don't think anyone's ever really talked about that on the pod, and we've done hundreds and hundreds of interviews.
Yeah.
I'm glad we ended with that, man, because
Yeah.
that's something I gotta, like, think about. Because in similar situation with you, I started buying properties when the rates were super low, and I was getting these, like, ludicrous numbers, like, cheap-wise. By the way, that the cheaper you buy the rental, the shittier your cost seg is. I learned that the
Absolutely.
hard way, dude.
Right. So
Pay
people
the
don't
price
understand that either. They want like tax
No, it's
benefits, but
fucking crazy, dude.
they're
I thought I
yeah.
was the king of condos in New York, dude. I thought I was, like, the mayor.
Yeah.
And I fucking talked to the CPA, and he's like, "Yeah, like, nice condos, like, they're great, but, like, your fucking cost segs suck." I was like, "I should probably buy a more expensive property, right?" And he's like, "Yeah." No, 'cause it's, like, so easy to get a cheap condo. I'm like, "Oh, yeah, fucking
Yeah.
pay 50 grand for this thing," and then you save 5,000 on a cost seg. You're like, "Fuck this, I'd rather flip,"
Yeah.
you know?
And looking at
Yeah,
the full like net opportunity there, right? And that's
yeah,
what comes with experience. I think you say people don't necessarily talk about that. I think about that. It's because, especially when you're in the transactional real estate game, like you're wholesaling, you're flipping, we're kind of like they call it the cowboy side of real estate, right? And there's
yeah,
always this
yeah,
sort of libertarian view of like, I'm going to stick to everyone else. I want to do my own thing.
yeah.
I don't want to have to get licensed and do all this bullshit, right? And as a result, we all tend to have a very strong aversion to taxes, but there's nothing wrong with paying taxes. It means you're
No.
making money,
Yeah,
right?
it means you're
And
making great money. Yeah,
mhm.
exactly.
Yeah, and once you've paid the taxes, that money's yours. Like, yeah, it sucks. Uncle
Yeah,
Sam's gonna go flush it down the toilet, but they're gonna do
that's
that
true.
at some point anyway. It's gonna be now or in the future.
I
Yeah,
agree with you, man.
yeah,
There are obviously tax benefits are great, but at the same time, it's like you got to really look at it from a logical standpoint and not just follow some guru online. So before we wrap up, I know I kept saying that.
yeah.
Talk about the Collecting Keys podcast and some of your coaching because you've been able to build that up quickly too. So I want to make sure we talk about that before we wrap up the show.
So we have the Collecting Keys podcast, which we've been running now for over 3 years. We have over 400 episodes on it, so that's pretty cool.
Awesome.
And we started it years ago because we just felt like there was too much fluff in real estate podcasts, right? Like
Yeah.
a lot of the bigger shows, they're always like, here's a 23-year-old kid that bought 2,000,
I
apartment
hated
units,
that
and
shit, dude.
and they don't tell you that like their dad's a physician that also owns a development company, right? It's like,
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
we wanted it to be like more of an operator show. And so that's
Yeah.
why we ultimately started, and that's what it's turned into. So that's on all podcast platforms. And then, yeah, so we have our Scale community. It's kind of a mentorship program. It's more like a GoBundance or like Collective Genius, where it's like an operator country club almost, right? So it's high level folks that are doing deals together, growing together. We do a couple meetups a year just to all get together, which is super fun. And then I'm actually launching something new here in the next week, which I'm calling Real Estate Unlocked. And going back to the like libertarian view, I really just hate the guru thing that has become so prevalent, where you have these dorks that are charging tens of thousands of dollars to do the super boring business that we talked about for this show, right? And they just want to put a huge paywall behind it. And so essentially what that is it's going to be all of the secrets of the gurus that you're going to get for free. And it's all like the SOPs and stuff that we've built that is what they're going to sell you for $10,000. And you can just come and have it for free. We have a little Facebook group,
That's
and,
awesome, man.
there's no like upsell or anything to that. I don't know. I'm just sick of watching like how the Highs and Pace Morby and all these dorks tell you that they have some secret when they really don't. We know exactly what they're doing, and you can have it
Yeah.
for free.
Dude, that's awesome, man. Well, if they want to check that out, how do they find that out?
Yeah. So that would be collectingkeys.com/unlocked. And they'll be able to get all that.
Collectingkeys.com/unlocked. They want to check out the pod, Collecting Keys podcast on all platforms. If they want to connect with you, Mike, on social media, what's the best handle for you?
Instagram's the best. It's just that Mike_invests.
Perfect. Well, we'll put all those in the show notes, Mike. I'm glad we did this interview.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg. See you, buddy.